Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about 2 soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Joe DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Joe, what are this week's games?
Up first is 2020's Paradise Killer, a bizarre and surreal mystery that brings back an exiled investigator to unwind a web of conspiracies amongst a group of immortals to figure out who killed Paradise.
Following that is the debut of the Battle Royale-like killing game of ultimate talented high school students run by a sadistic half-white, half-black bear. 2014's Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. You know, sometimes the games that we cover on this show are only loosely connected by the most vague terms that it's almost like, all right, you guys had a stretch on that one. Like, I see what you did there, but it's a little tenuous.
You know, stuff like skeletons. When I realized we could have just said point-and-click adventure games, because they're both point-and-click adventure games.
With skeletons. Honestly, though, this week, these two games probably could not be more alike if you tried. It's a game that was inspired by the other. Like, literally, change a few things, change different plots, but wow, very similar games this week with Paradise Killer and the first Danganronpa game.
Very, very, very much so. Also, anybody that was watching the video version of the intro got to see a rare sighting of No Beard Joe.
Oh no.
And I don't like it, but that's where we are today.
I'm sorry. Oh, well, beside that, Joe, how are you doing? What are you playing?
I am doing pretty all right. I've been banging away at more of Famicom Detective Club. I started The Girl That Stands Behind, which is the better one of the two, from what I can tell so far, even though both of them are very weird. I actually had a review of Missing Air go up last week, so you can check that out if you want to know what I felt about that one. It is a Famicom game with a fresh coat of paint and almost no change, as far as I'm aware, to any of its gameplay whatsoever. So,
for better or for worse, I guess?
For better or for worse, the game's basically just built on, alright, you're stuck in this scene. Do every possible permutation of every option you are given, and maybe one day the game will let you move forward. It's weird. I also have been playing your game, but I only got through one chapter because I wanted to finish the game before we recorded, but just, boy, a lot of stuff has occurred in the past couple weeks that have kept me from that. But I'm enjoying it so far. We'll talk about it more when we get to that part. And also, I have now played about 6 hours of Shin Megami Tensei 3 Nocturne HD Remaster on stream. You can go look at the VODs of that on twitch.tv/Nintendo World Report. Basically, the whole stream is Matt questioning why he's even there, because I keep saying the funny things. I disagree that means he shouldn't be there, but I mean, that's where we are. But it's pretty alright so far. It's definitely a PS2 era JRPG, though. I'll say that.
I can see that for sure. Let's see. I beat Mass Effect. Kind of burned through that one, a little under 20 hours on the Legendary Edition collection. Really liked the improvements they made overall in that game. It's a fun to go back to that. And so I moved on to my favorite in the trilogy then, Mass Effect 2. Let's see. I just got to Ilium, and so kind of just setting the groundwork for all of the missions there. So still have yet to recruit Tali, Samara, Thane. That's the kind of trio of those dossiers there, and yet to do any loyalty missions. So just kind of setting those up, also just exploring the galaxy and getting all those side missions before just bang, bang, bang. We're going to knock those out. Just having a great time. One of my favorite games, top 5 easily, I think. And it just shows like Mass Effect 2 does not feel like a 2010 game. It's kind of amazing how that has aged rather well.
I have heard roughly the same thing from a lot of people, like over Twitter and stuff, is that, wow, you know what? Mass Effect 2 is still pretty damn good. Turns out.
Pretty amazing, that's for sure. That's about what I've been playing, though. So let's get to some composer follow-up news. We like to cover a whole bunch of composers over the history of this show, and we like to kind of follow up what they're doing, what they're working on, because they're still making cool things. So we get some headlines in the game industry that kind of tie into them. First of all, Laura Shigihara, who we talked about on episode 4. Speaking of Mass Effect, we talked about Rakuen on that episode with the first Mass Effect. Boy, that was an interesting pairing of games in the early days of this podcast. But Laura Shigihara now has a SoundCloud. So you can go check out her SoundCloud page at soundcloud.com/supershiggy. This is on top of all of the streaming that she does. So go check her work out. She's fantastic.
Yeah, I believe the exact wording she used when announcing it was, "This is part of my ongoing battle against people ripping my music and uploading it to YouTube." Which, you know what? That's fair. Meanwhile, Megan McDuffie, who we talked about for her work on River City Girls, has released a studio album. I believe when we talked about Megan McDuffie during the River City Girls episode, we mentioned that she had something in the works. The album is called Inner Demons. You can now buy it on her Bandcamp, either digitally, on a physical CD, or even on vinyl if you want, at meganmcduffie.bandcamp.com. And also on her YouTube channel, you can find a music video for the 4th track on the album, Wicked Thing. It's pretty good, and from what I've heard of the album, I haven't really had a chance to really dive into it yet, but from what I've heard, it's fantastic stuff.
That's really good to hear. Yeah, I remember talking about that on the episode where we covered her, so it's good to see that's come full circle into fruition. And finally, we're getting into a crazy pre-E3 2021 time. I mean, gosh, even tomorrow, as of time of recording, May 27th, that's going to be the day when Dragon Quest has an anniversary stream. Sonic has a Sonic Central stream with news. There's a Horizon Forbidden West State of Play. This is all just in one day, and of course, we're recording just before it. So, still more game news to come. Stay tuned to all of those developments. But today, as of time of recording, which will be several days out of date when you get to listen to it, this is the day when Pokemon got to announce some release dates for its upcoming games in the franchise. So, Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl will launch on November 19th, 2021 in North America for Nintendo Switch. These are the Gen 4 remakes. We talked about Pokemon Diamond and Pearl on the show before. And then, I think most surprising of all is Pokemon Legends Arceus is coming January 22nd, 2022. Okay, look, I knew early 2022 was a possibility. It's what they talked about, but late January? Would not be surprised if that gets eventually delayed with COVID things and they're trying a whole new type of Pokemon game, but that's exciting that they have that much faith in it to put a date on it.
Yeah, it's surprising that it's coming out that early. Granted, we don't really know how long the game's been in development in general, so it just could be that this game has been in development for way longer than we've known about it. I think I'm most interested in seeing how that game is. I mean, I already kind of know how Diamond and Pearl play.
Yeah, Diamond and Pearl are going to be solid, but I mean, this is the next big step for trying to expand what Pokemon is. It's very exciting.
Yeah, so we'll have to see. I'm very interested in what it can mean. And also, in terms of the Sonic and Horizon stuff, isn't that not only on the same day, but the same time?
Oh, I think so.
Yeah, I believe they're on, the same hour block. It's kind of nuts.
By the time you listen, it'll be old news, but for us, we're excited.
So, let us talk about our first game for the week. That is Paradise Killer. Paradise Killer was originally released on September 4th, 2020. It is available on Nintendo Switch and PC, which I forgot that it didn't actually come out on PS4 or Xbox. That's interesting. It was developed and published by Kaizen Gameworks, which is a 2-person team that is made up of Oliver Clark-Smith and Phil Crabtree. They are based in the UK. I found an article on gamesindustry.biz by Hayden Taylor, where I think he summed up the aesthetic of Paradise Killer perfectly, which is, quote, "The world of Paradise Killer is a queer-friendly cosmic horror bonanza, a heady mix of sun-drenched Miami Beach paradise meets madness from beyond the stars." And that's a pretty good description of the tone that Paradise Killer is bringing to the table. It is an open-world, first-person adventure game where the player is given almost completely free reign of an almost abandoned island, and the gameplay is essentially what you expect. It doesn't really do anything special in terms of gameplay. You're talking to people, you're collecting information, you're trying to show people evidence you think might draw out further information, etc., etc. But where Paradise Killer does find its uniqueness and its hook is actually in the world and characters, which, okay, so here's the thing. I'm gonna need y'all to bear with me because this game's world is actually crazy hard to explain, I found out. Like, I don't know if I'm gonna be able to do it justice, but let's try. So, Paradise Killer takes place in a universe where mankind has made contact with cosmic gods from across the universe. This has not only attracted the attention of said gods to our small planet, but also a number of demons who wander the cosmos as well. Different sects of the world have responded in various differing ways, but we are going to focus on a group of immortals known as the Syndicate and their leadership known as the Council. So, the Syndicate has spent its existence creating, quote-unquote, paradise, which is what they refer to when talking about a series of islands in pocket realities that are meant to resurrect fallen gods and return them to their former glory or something like that. I never actually quite understood what the point of the island is. But unfortunately, all of these various versions of Paradise have failed for one reason or another. And this game takes place at the end of Island 24. And it also takes place on the eve of when 24 is going to go away, and they will transition to the island that they are already referring to as Perfect 25. But disaster strikes when the entire council is murdered in an area that only the council should have had access to. The murder is immediately blamed on a young man named Henry Division, who had years prior been possessed by a demon and made to kill his mother. However, the Syndicate's arbiter of justice, a being who has given up all sense of ego named Judge, feels as though the solution is not that simple. For this reason, Judge summons the expertise of Lady Love Dies, the former Syndicate investigator who has been in exile for 3 million days. She is tasked with searching the island and getting to the truth, interviewing the various Syndicate members who had not been taken to Perfect 25 before the murders took place. So, the people that are on the island that you will be talking to are Lydia Daybreak, the Syndicate's transporter and longtime friend of Love Dies. She has a car that can drive everywhere and fly, I guess. I don't really know. And also her husband Sam Daybreak, who is a skeletal bartender who makes whiskey based on the quote-unquote flavors of every island. Architect Carmelina Silence, who is the builder of Paradise. She shapes and designs all of the islands to try and get as close to perfection as she can. Grand Marshal Akiko 14, head of Paradise's law enforcement, and number one not fan of Lady Love Dies. She's very mean. Crimson Acid is the Syndicate's idol, who's meant to entertain the human citizens of Paradise. You have Witness to the End, a deeply religious man whose job is to oversee the end of each island. The best name, Dr. Doom Jazz, who is Paradise's medical expert and an infamous womanizer. And lastly, Yuri Knight, the architect's secretary and super arrogant, relatively new member to the Syndicate. So if you haven't noticed, The thing that binds all these characters together is they have super weird names. All of them.
Almost Kojima-like in a way.
Almost Kojima-like. I didn't find any evidence that Kojima played any part in the inspiration for this game. But if you told me that they looked at Kojima's naming schemes and said, yeah, we can do that, I'd believe you.
Yeah, when Kojima had a character named Die Hard Man.
And Hot Coldman.
Yes.
That's his name, right?
Yes.
From Peace Walker.
That's right.
Kojima shouldn't be allowed to name things. So the question of the game becomes, can Lady Love Dies solve the locked room mystery that will go down in history as the crime of the century? Investigating these murders leads her down a spiral of intercrossing conspiracies and motivations, which all ends at the final trial. And the question becomes, who killed Paradise? Who is, as you might say, a Paradise Killer? This is where I'll ask you, Peter, what are our experiences with Paradise Killer?
So, it's a game that I constantly see. It goes on sale on the Nintendo eShop, down to around $13 in the US. And I'm like, I should get it. I really like Danganronpa. This game is very heavily inspired by Danganronpa. And I haven't bought it yet. I do want to play it. I feel like it's a game I'm going to get to this year. And hearing the music and how inspired by synthwave it is. I mean, it's right up my alley. So, not a game I have played yet or know that much about. But I feel like it's one I should experience soon.
I played it near the beginning of the year. And because I remember you getting angry at me because I said, yeah, I finished Paradise Killer. And you were like, but you haven't even started Danganronpa yet. What is wrong with you?
It is continually baffling to me that is how you experienced these two games. And I'm sure for Danganronpa fans, they also feel the same.
Probably. But I enjoyed Paradise Killer. I think the gameplay gets really, really, really tedious after a while. Because basically the way it works is you have this open world island that you can wander wherever and you can pick up evidence and everything. And you can start the trial whenever you want.
Okay.
At any point in the game. There is no point where the game says, all right, you found everything. Let's go to the trial. You have to initiate it when you feel like you have enough evidence personally.
And there's only one trial, right?
There is one trial at the very end. It doesn't play like a Danganronpa trial, but it is also still very interesting. And basically you do a trial to decide the perpetrator of every single crime you come across the entire game all at once. And it is a very interesting moment and all that, but it's got one solution and you have to piece that together yourself, essentially. And I find that very interesting. The only problem is, you know how you can walk around the school in Danganronpa?
You can even run in it, and you go pretty fast to cover all that ground.
You can run in Paradise Killer too, it doesn't matter. It is roughly probably 5 times as big as the school in Danganronpa. Characters that you have to talk to are scattered all over the damn island. And every time you find a piece of evidence or talk to a character and they reveal literally any information, now you have a new piece of dialogue you can go talk to the other characters with. I think that's the game's biggest flaw. I will give a piece of advice for anybody that does play it, but especially for you. When you see foot baths, use them. The first thing you should do is use a foot bath, because that unlocks different abilities, such as a double jump, because there's platforming in this game. And also, you can unlock this ability called Meditate, where Lady Love Dies will close her eyes, and then when she opens them, an exclamation point has now appeared over every single collectible on the map.
Aha.
Hundreds of them. So it's definitely got some problems in that front, but I think the plot and everything is good enough that it does more than make up for it. I think it's a very interesting world, even though I still don't understand half the crap that happens. elements in it. But it's a very interesting game, and I do think it is worth playing, and I do think it is worth talking about, which I found more information on this game than I expected, because the Wikipedia article is very lacking on information, so I was worried that meant there was none. Luckily, I was wrong. So, both members of Kaizen are actually industry veterans, which I didn't know this before this. Crabtree worked mainly in the mobile sector, according to the selected games that he put on his list on the studio's website. But Smith used to work at Supermassive Games. He worked on games like Until Dawn and Man of Medan, as well as, and not only does his website point it out, but a Vice interview that I found pointed it out, he was a former developer on 50 Cent, Blood on the Sand. Which that ain't a game I expected to come up today, or at any point in this show, but here we are. So, in fact, Smith mentioned that Until Dawn and the Dark Pictures anthology technically influences on the game, but like in an odd anti-influence manner. Like, he literally says, quote, "With Paradise Killer, we intentionally disregarded a lot of the lessons I learned on those games because we wanted a much more chill, player's own pace game." I find that super interesting because I don't think we've ever had a development story that was, held up by the fact of, yeah, we made this game and learned a bunch of lessons from it, and then we threw those lessons in the garbage and did something else. But their goal was to make a story that is technically linear. It is technically linear. There is one correct sequence of events that occurred, but all of the power is put into the player's hands as to when they feel like they have figured out that sequence of events, and also whether they actually figure out the real sequence of events or not, if their logic actually works out. This is also why the player is able to start the trial whenever they want, because that just means that you have to make your own judgment call of, I think I have enough to piece together what happened. And you can accuse anybody during the trial of any crime. The thing that matters is you have to have the evidence to back up your accusation, essentially. And I found a couple quotes from Smith that I found interesting about this. He said, quote, "Why do so many people working in an interactive medium always fixate on telling you a story rather than letting you interact with it? In narrative games, you're seemingly always having to jump through narrative hoops to make the story progress." He also said, quote, "There must be an immutable truth to the game's fiction. Everything needs to be explained or justified either in-game or at least within our own heads. If that truth exists, the player can trust the game. The history and the method of the crime never changes, just your interpretation and path to the truth. For us, the narrative truth is sacred and can never be hand-waved away. We reworked a lot over the course of the project to make sure that inconsistencies or plot holes were fixed or explained." So basically, they worked really hard on making sure that the player wasn't going to have an easy time, like, going to a completely opposite conclusion of what actually happened. Like, you have to make it informative enough to make sure the player has some idea of what happened when they find all the evidence, but also, like, you can't just straight up tell them at any point. That's not fun. That's not a mystery game.
You know what this makes me think of, actually, is Her Story.
A little bit, yeah.
And how you find these disparate parts and you're trying to piece together a story. Now, granted, you're not quizzed at the end of Her Story like you are essentially with, sounds like, this trial in Paradise Killer. But it kind of goes back to, like, yeah, there's an immutable truth in the story of the world, and it's, up to the player to kind of figure it all out and come to that conclusion.
Yeah, and put it all together. That's a pretty good, I think that's actually a really good comparison, because Her Story is a linear but open-ended mystery, and so is this. So, a goal they had for how the setting was portrayed, though, was to make it familiar enough that the player could understand what they were seeing, but weird and alien enough to sort of pique the player's interest and make them think, I need to know more about this. Another thing that I really liked about how they talked about how they put together the world was there are a bunch of artifacts all over the island. They don't do anything. You could just collect them, and they're kind of meant to show that, like, yeah, people lived here until very recently. So major inspirations for the game included the works of H.P. Lovecraft and Franz Kafka. Neither of those surprise me at all, especially Lovecraft. But also the Danganronpa series, as you mentioned. And gameplay-wise, on the overworld, Paradise Killer is just Danganronpa with a jump. That's it. It's just Danganronpa with a jump button, down to the characters of the game being represented by 2D images, like in a 3D world. It's nuts, actually. So they apparently had multiple concepts for a game that they had thrown around before the one that we ended up getting. One of them they described as Gone Home Cross Crazy Taxi. And I have to know what that game would have been. Make that game, please. Please make it? I don't understand what that could possibly mean.
You're going to different points in a certain set amount of time with crazy driving, but then you're getting little tidbits of story along the way at each of those stops.
I would play the hell out of that. Make it. But then Smith kind of found himself particularly taken with another indie title, being Valhalla Cyberpunk Bartender Action. And from there, they decided on an aesthetic that would invoke the games of the Sega Dreamcast era and mash it with the more modern era of storytelling in video games. Phil Crabtree has a great quote about how it eventually just came together of, quote, "We like cosmic horror and survival horror as well. We both like Japanese architecture, we both like city pop, and it's just, why can't we put all these things together? And perhaps foolishly, we just let ourselves do it, though I don't really know if I'd say survival horror is any part of this. I guess the gods technically, but you don't really interact with them. You just sort of hear about them. I don't know. But I found that quote to be very, very interesting. But that exact mindset kind of came with a bit of a problem, because then they realized they didn't know how to explain what kind of game Paradise Killer was. They just sort of didn't have a term for it. And they mentioned how if you look at screenshots, in one screenshot, you could be forgiven for thinking it was a visual novel. I thought it was a visual novel before I started playing it. But also, if you look at a different screenshot, you might think that it's a walking simulator. It's not either of those, but it's also kind of both of those. It's really, really, really bizarre. And the fact that even I am sitting here having difficulty explaining what kind of game it is saying something. But nonetheless, it was received very well upon release. Currently sits at a Metacritic of 82. The game received praise for its aesthetic and world building, as well as its writing, and also a bunch of praise heaped on it for the game's soundtrack, which we will get to, is totally worth it. But many critics did point out, like I said, the gameplay gets a little bit tedious after a while. There is fast travel in the game, but you have to pay currency to use it.
No.
Which kind of, in my opinion, goes against the idea of fast travel, but whatever, it's fine. Like, you have to pay to unlock the fast travel location, and then you have to pay to use the fast travel.
Did they play Danganronpa at all? Look at the bigger map. Go to the fast travel, it's free. Like, what? Oh, come on.
So, while the game has done well enough to keep the studio afloat for now, it almost didn't do that, because at the very beginning, when it first came out, they had a tool that was supposed to send, YouTubers, reviewers, reporters, like, copies of Paradise Killer. And then that tool didn't work. And so news outlets didn't get early copies of Paradise Killer.
Oops.
And so they didn't play it. But Luckily, the game did find an audience eventually, and it did get into the eyes of the game press eventually, because I saw a lot of people talk about how it was one of their favorite games of 2020. It's up there on a lot of lists for a lot of game journalists. I don't think it would have been on my list had I played it in 2020 instead of in 2021, but here we are. It did sell kind of well, though, not like gangbusters. There was a point in one of the interviews where they talked about how they were super ready to just be like, all right, the game's out. Time to get the cover letter and resumes ready because we no longer have a job. But that didn't happen. It's kept them afloat. It's even given them the ability to hire a third member of the team. And I very much look forward to what they do next. Paradise Killer is one of those games that honestly wasn't nominated for a ton of awards. The only one I could find hasn't happened yet. That is the Indie Games Festival Awards. That's happening in July. It is currently nominated for the Seamus McNally Grand Prize at these awards. So that's pretty great. And I look forward to hearing how it does on that. All right, let's talk about the composer. The little bit I can find. I found plenty of stuff about people talking to him about this soundtrack, but nothing talking to him about him, as far as I could tell. His name is Barry Topping. He is a Scotland-based artist who goes by the alias Epoch. That's E-P-O-C-H, like the measure of time. And you can follow him on Twitter at NoStoppingEpoch, and visit his Bandcamp at nostoppingepoch.bandcamp.com. He also apparently co-hosts a podcast called Two Good Boys. For his discography, he doesn't seem to have done a lot of games. He seems to be fairly new to the industry. He did the soundtrack for a game called Jack Be Nimble, and then he did Paradise Killer, and that's it. That's all he's done, as far as I can tell. So let's talk about the historical development research of this soundtrack in general. So much like Valhalla or Coffee Talk, the music is not generally associated with any specific area or character. Kinda, sorta. So you can find tracks throughout the world that when you find them, they will add to a playlist of songs that can play in the background. And you can rearrange this playlist and you can decide which songs play or what don't. You can switch manually to any song. But they are placed in areas where the devs figured that it would make sense for that song to be playing, because they wanted to make sure that it sounded not just like a song that is playing in the background of the game, but like these are songs that exist in the game world that you are listening to. So for instance, there's a song called House of Bliss, which is kind of a club song almost, a little bit. And so that is located, you can find it outside of Sam's Bar, because that's the closest the island has to a dance club. It's not quite there, but that's the kind of thing that they tried to work towards. Like there's another song that has the word sunset in its name, and you can find that on the beach where you can see the sunset, etc., etc. A major inspiration for the soundtrack, though, was the Japanese genre of city pop, which I mentioned in one of the quotes earlier. Was a very popular genre in the 70s and 80s, from what I gather. And they wanted to make sure that they could make an original soundtrack that was based on the genre, but, still fit with the fact that you are, in fact, investigating a mass murder, which I assume was not easy, but I think they kind of pulled it off. They also wanted some of the songs to feel like a fusion between 80s and 90s aesthetic, because to them, the sort of visuals were a sharp sort of collision of both of those aesthetics. They wanted to make sure that there was a variety of moods in the songs, but they also still wanted to keep this big emphasis on, like, you're always moving in Paradise Killer. Lady Love Dies is going from clue to person, etc., 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 etc. And so they wanted to sort of have that sort of drive throughout the soundtrack, but in different ways. Barry Topping also shouts out Fabian Hernandez, because he provides saxophone performances across the soundtrack, and they are damn good. Also, I learned that Topping is apparently the voice of Dr. Doom Jazz, which I didn't know, so that's pretty cool. Anyways, you can buy the soundtrack digitally on Kaizen's Bandcamp page at kaizengameworks.bandcamp.com, but Black Screen Records is currently also running pre-orders for the soundtrack on a clear, transparent vinyl, which looks really cool, and the expected shipping date of those is August of 2021, so you can go check that out if you like what you hear here. Anyways, let's get into the thing that we can hear here right now. Let's start with the 5 critical tracks. First one is critical track number 1, Paradise, Stay Forever. So vocals in this song are provided by Fiona Lynch. And apparently I learned, which shout out, Kaizen actually did like an hour-long video where they just sat down and talked to Barry Topping about the soundtrack.
That's awesome.
It's super cool. Super appreciated. But during that video, Topping said that the vocals for this song were recorded 2 weeks before COVID lockdowns began at the beginning of 2020.
Wow.
He says that it was one of his last social experiences before lockdown happened. And this is, I believe, the main theme of the game, essentially. At least I consider it to be. I don't know if he does. But I only really ever heard the instrumental version of this song in-game. But, like, the instrumental version's not on the soundtrack release, and also, the vocal version is just so good. Like, Fiona Lynch kills it. She's so good. And also, it's got a bunch of, like, leitmotifs that show up in various other pieces on the soundtrack, which Topping says was on purpose because the leitmotif of this song is meant to be representative of the island as a whole, and that'll actually come back into play in a little bit in another track on the cutting room floor. Apparently, though, Fiona Lynch got involved in the project because, and this actually comes as a shock to me, Edinburgh, Scotland apparently has a very active jazz scene. Not the place I'd expect a jazz scene, but then again, I live in a place nobody would expect to be a big jazz scene, so what do I know? And he had seen Fiona sing with her jazz band once before she came on to do this song. That's how they first met. They recorded in Topping's house, and then 2 weeks later, Topping wasn't allowed to leave the house anymore. So, cool sequence of events there. It's really hard not to call this song my favorite. It's like, the whole soundtrack is great. This song is like a cut above everything. It's so good.
Paradise Killer was represented as an honorable mention on our best of 2020 list, and it was with this song. I totally agree. It's my favorite of the songs you brought here, and that's saying a lot because the vibe of this soundtrack is totally up my alley with all the synthwave here, but Fiona Lynch does an incredible job. I am really happy to know that this piece exists, but a little disappointed that the vocal version doesn't seem to be in the game as you didn't really come across it.
Yeah, I don't know if it plays on the title splash, and I just don't remember. But I'm as far as I'm aware, I never heard the vocal version in game.
I mean, instrumental is great, but the vocals just take it to a whole nother level.
Very much so. Very much so. Following that, we have critical track number 2. It's 8th Street Rose. don't actually have a ton to say about this song. I just kind of really like it. Like, the combination of the piano part, there's also like a really good guitar solo later on in the piece. It's just a good song. It really, really stuck out to me. I will say, some of this probably has a lot of bias towards the songs I did manage to find in-game, because I didn't find them all. So I'm obviously going to be a lot more drawn to songs that I heard while I was playing, and this is one of them. I really, really like this piece.
Man, if your head does not get bopping to this, I don't know what to tell you. I think it shows perfectly well when you're talking about like how the songs all have the pace, because, you know, Lady Love Dies is moving and investigating and all that. And yeah, it just gets you going immediately. I think it's a good sense for what the feel of a lot of these songs is.
Following that is a song that is actually tied for second place on my favorites list. It is Critical Check number 3, Leaving. When I heard the beginning of this song, it was immediately like, oh right, I remember hearing this song a lot. Like a lot. Like a lot. And the fact that I'm not sick of it is a testament to how damn good it is. Because I really, really dig, like, I don't know how to describe the synths. I want to say grungy, but that doesn't feel right.
No, not necessarily grungy. There's a lot of reverb here.
Yeah.
A lot of echo. So, but yeah, I don't know about grungy.
Yeah, I don't think grungy is the word I'm looking for, but like there's just a ton of reverb on it. It gives the song this really, really like cool vibe. It's super good. There's also a bit of a point where everything drops out except for a synth piano part, which is really, really good. It's not in the clip, but like the whole song is great. You can hear the synths in there. Hopefully you know what I'm talking about when I try to describe them. But yeah, I adore the song.
I feel like the reverb definitely adds to this feeling of like it's surrounding you. And maybe, again, it's hard to say when these songs don't have a specific context, but I hear it and I almost think like, you know, the ideas are kind of bouncing around your head in a way. You're trying not to have it swallow you up as like it's playing with, you know, some pans and all that. Yeah, I feel like that's the kind of feeling that this song's going for.
Yeah, I could see that. If I had to take a guess, I don't know. I only know where one of these songs is located, where you can find it, and that's the next track, because they said it in the video with Mr. Topping. But if I had to take a guess as to where this song might have been, this is another one that I found fairly early. Probably right next to Lydia's car. Because, I mean, that's the only way you can leave the island is if you get in Lydia's car and she drives you to the next island, etc., etc. So it makes sense if that's where it was. Anyways, Critical Check number 4, I do know where this one is found, and I find it super interesting, its location. It's End of the World. Apparently this track can be found right next to the murder scene of some guards right outside the council building, where then, you know, you can't get to the murder scene for a real long time of the council, but you can get to the murder scene of these two guards. This is another song I feel like I heard a ton throughout my entire playthrough. I really, really dig the synthy jazz vibe that this song goes for, and there's honestly also another really, really cool, like, dramatic piano part later on in the song that just sends a chill up my spine. And to me, outside of Paradise Stay Forever, while it may not be my favorite, I do think that this is the song I'm going to associate Paradise Killer with more so than the other tracks, even though I like a lot of the other tracks more.
It's really interesting because the vibe of this song is just more positive, just kind of a casual stroll. And I would look at a title like End of the World and it being placed near the murder scene and it just being a lot darker, a lot more dramatic. But no, not the case. Really interesting.
From what I understand, the logic behind it was this is a song being written by somebody that is like witnessing the end of one of the islands from relative safety, I assume, which is probably why it's like this. Though that piano part that I mentioned does get a little bit more somber, sort of. It's a bit more of a minor key. But when you want to get into dark, let's get into dark. Critical track number 5 is The Sarcophagus. So, much like Coffee Talk and sort of like Valhalla, there are actually a couple of songs that do play in specific areas. This is one of them. This song plays in the Dead Zone, which is an area of the island that has been completely sealed off because of the demonic corruption that has resulted from Henry Division's possession years prior. It's just this really deep, heavy, angry synth piece that just hits home that, hey, no, you don't want to be here. This is not a good place. And it even, at certain points, starts to bring in a bit of the Paradise Stay Forever leitmotif, which, like I said, Barry Topping considers to be the leitmotif that represents the island, but it's in a bit of a minor key here, which to me is representing that this is basically a wound on the island. It is a sickness that is on a particular part of it. And I think this one ties with Leaving as my second favorite track. I really, really dig this song.
This one is so cool. This is my second favorite, I would say. This kind of reminds me of the kind of vibe you get in Hotline Miami, in Katana Zero.
Yeah.
Which, again, great kind of synthwave soundtracks to pull reference from. But this one is just so cool. And I really like, the descriptions. Like, this one makes more sense then, right? Like when you're talking about the Dead Zone, demonic corruption, a wound on the island. That's all great stuff. And that one fits. I feel like this one's a really strong one for sure.
Yeah, I'm super into this song. And I chose this song before I knew about the leitmotif thing. That's how good it is, guys. So, in terms of cutting room floor tracks, I have 2. The first one is Midori Eyes. Yeah, baby, let's get funky. I don't know, this song has a really good groove to it. It's got a really good bass part, like this groove bass. It's a fun song. I really appreciate it.
Jazzy piano, can't go wrong.
Yeah.
It's a nice kind of, again, you're getting back in that upbeat, positive tempo. We're moving, things are happening, but cool instruments to match with that feel.
Very much so. And the second room of the cutting room floor track is actually another song that plays in a very specific location, and that is Temple of Tears. Now I know what you're thinking. Why are we talking about a Devil May Cry song?
I was just saying, yeah, big tonal shift here. Wow.
This song plays when you go to the pyramid. And there happens to be something or someone there. And these organs and choir really accentuate their presence, and it makes a ton of sense why it sounds like this when you go and talk to them. It's really a really cool moment of the game. I'm not like super huge on the song. It's not one of my favorites. I think it's good, but it's not one that I would normally put here. But I think the part where it plays is actively a cool discovery. So yeah, there's that.
And that's all part of it too, right? I mean, yeah, maybe this song on its own doesn't stand out, but when it's paired with a great moment in the game, I mean, it's the pairing of it together.
Very much so. So what will I never forget about Paradise Killer? I really, really like the story and the world and the characters of this game. Yuri Knight is one of the most punchable people I've ever seen in a video game. And I've played a lot of video games with some very punchable people. But he's just this arrogant jerk the whole time. You can unwind like all these different things. Sometimes you'll find information that you learn about things that have nothing to do with the case. They're just around. That could be seen as a hindrance, I guess, but for the most part, I just think it's a really cool, like, method of building the world around you, and it does a great job of, portraying that Lady Love Dies has been away from these people that she considers friends for 3 million days. I don't know how many years that is, but it's probably a lot. So there's also not only this sense of I have to solve the mystery, but also like this sense of, well, I need to find out what people have been up to in the past 3 million days since I saw them last. It's a very interesting game, I think. I think it has some problems gameplay-wise, but overall, I do think it is worth a look if you like mystery games.
Yeah, Danganronpa gameplay with her story, like open-ended storytelling. Yeah, sign me up.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Just be ready to walk around an island very much. A lot. Tons. It is not a small island, is what I'm trying to say. So, for our transition, usually we like to highlight a fan remix or cover, but apparently there aren't any. I looked on YouTube. I searched like 5 different search terms. I searched Paradise Killer remix, Paradise Killer cover. I searched specific songs. Nothing. Nobody's done any remix of these songs. I don't understand how that is a thing. Come on, internet. Get on it. So I'm going to transition us with another song off the soundtrack. It is called Lady Blue. Apparently, this song can be found while overlooking the ocean, because blue. And also, something I learned after I had already decided this was the transition, otherwise it'd probably be in the Critical 5. This song apparently has another leitmotif that appears in a few places, and Topping considers it to be the one that is representative of Lady Love Dies herself. So please enjoy that, and we will be right back.
So, what is this Danganronpa game that Paradise Killer is inspired by?
The Dang It Ron Paul game.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So let's get to talking about the first game in the Danganronpa series. This is Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. So we have talked about Danganronpa twice on the show already, covering Danganronpa 2 Goodbye Despair on episode 20, where we talked about the main composer of the series, Masafumi Takada. And then we covered Danganronpa V3 Killing Harmony on episode 91 of Original Soundchat. That was covering Megumi Ogata, she was the singer in the end credits. And she's also one of the main voice actors in the Japanese version of this game. So, hey, there you go. So, Danganronpa first started as a PlayStation portable game.
It did? I thought it was a Vita game. Oh, wow. I didn't realize it was on PSP.
Well, here's the thing. It started on PSP, which may be one of the first games we've talked about that started as a PSP game on this show. Yeah. But it released on November 25th, 2010 in Japan as Danganronpa Kibo no Gakuen to Setsubo no Kokusei. And that roughly translates to Danganronpa, the Academy of Hope and the High School Students of Despair.
First, we have a Saturn game. Now we have a PSP game.
What's going on here?
Next week, one of us has to bring an Ouya game.
Yeah, geez. Oh my gosh. What was that one that Matt makes games?
I don't remember. Towerfall.
That's the one. That's the one. Yeah, maybe we eventually bring that. Oh my gosh. Wow. So yeah, Danganronpa started as a PSP game in Japan. Then Japan got iOS and Android releases of this game on August 20th, 2012. Then the PlayStation Vita release hit Japan on October 10th, 2013. It was bundled with the game's sequel on Vita. And so finally, a few months after that happened, Danganronpa came to the West on PlayStation Vita, the first game known as Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. This was released on February 11th, 2014 in North America. PAL regions got the game on the 14th. It would add some extra new features, so, kind of distinguishes itself a little bit, but, so yeah, when you're talking Trigger Happy Havoc, it's the Western Vita release. Oddly enough, then, we've talked about with the sequel, Danganronpa 2, Goodbye Despair, it would only be released like 7 months later. You got 2 games of a new franchise in 2014 in North America. Just crazy. Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc would then release on PC worldwide on February 18th, 2016. You'd also get the game on PS4, either part of the Danganronpa 1 and 2 Reload package in 2017, or the Danganronpa Trilogy release in 2019. So, definitely some different ways to play the game. If you still have your Vita, it's great to take it and play portably and play in chunks. I know you've been playing on PC, but it's also there on PS4.
And I cannot believe it is not on Switch.
It's crazy, right?
Genuinely cannot believe that none of them have come to Switch yet.
It's one of those series, that trilogy, that it's begging for a Switch trilogy port. It's got to happen at some point, assuming that there aren't contracts and things with exclusivity holding it up. But yeah, got to be a Switch game. Oh my gosh. Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc was developed by Spike and published by Spike in Japan. The rest of the world had it published by NIS America. So we've talked about in general what Danganronpa is before on these other episodes, but if you're new and this is your first time listening to an episode with Danganronpa, the gist of it is a visual novel that features murder mystery investigations and trials where players will need to point out the contradictions about the cases. If that sounds pretty familiar to the setup of, say, an Ace Attorney game, yeah, that's probably the closest gameplay comparison. But then you have the plot setup of a Battle Royale or Hunger Games kind of situation. You get the dark theming of the Zero Escape franchise. And then you splash some of Persona's social links on there. It's quite the mishmash, but I would say Danganronpa is a must for Ace Attorney fans, for sure. It primarily plays as like a first-person visual novel, though, and you're going to be doing a whole bunch of reading, and you have to pay attention. Investigate, gather clues that eventually are like the form of bullets that you fire at words at the trial. It's a good time all around. So the plot of Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. How do you start this franchise? Well, you start it with Makoto Naegi, who is an otherwise average and unexceptional student, and he's selected in a raffle and chosen to enroll at the prestigious Hope's Peak Academy as the ultimate lucky student. So on his first day of school, he falls asleep and then wakes to find 14 other newly picked students with ultimate talents. Then a sadistic remote-controlled bear named Monokuma appears before them, telling them that they will be imprisoned in the academy for the rest of their lives, and that they will be put to death if they violate any of the school's rules. He states that there is only one way that a student can leave the academy: murder another student and avoid being identified as the culprit. If they are found out, the murderer will be violently executed. If the class identifies the wrong student as the murderer, they will all be killed, and the real murderer will be allowed to graduate. Now, while the students don't want to commit murder, extra motivation from Monokuma forces a student's hand, and the killing game begins. The big questions are, can Makoto discover the mastermind behind this game of despair? And who will survive and escape Hope's Peak Academy? Joe, here's where I'll ask you, what are our experiences with Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc?
I have played one chapter. I finished chapter 1. That's as far as I've gotten. So I have done one full trial. I've done one full investigation. And I've hung out with a couple of people. One of the people that has died so far, I was kind of surprised, because I foolishly assumed that seeing a lot of fan art of that character meant they probably lived for a little while. Nope. But also the other character I sort of pegged immediately as, oh, so you're either the first killer or the first victim. Like, you have it written all over. There's no way you're not. So, okay, cool. And I was right. So that's going well. I still need to get back to it. I'm probably going to put it on the back burner for a little bit so I can play my game that I'm supposed to talk about next week. But I'm going to finish it because I very much enjoyed what I have already played.
Oh, I'm really glad to hear that, especially for how long I've been wanting you to play this game that I know you'd enjoy playing.
Longer than this show has existed.
Oh my God, you're telling me. So it is very interesting to hear your observations, and I just have to go, yes, interesting, quite, yep. So we'll just leave that at that. But also, I mean, it's definitely a game that when they're trying to introduce you to the world and how to play this game, it's a game where I'd say up through the first 3 of 6 cases, if you've played Ace Attorney games, if you've played murder mystery games before, they're pretty easy overall. The first chapter, yeah, piece of cake, right? They telegraph all of that really well. But then it's the twists in the later games. Oh man, it's so good. I was introduced to Danganronpa with, of course, the Vita version. Just after my birthday in 2014, I'm like, this, from all reviews, from all talk, it sounds like a mashup of everything I love. And well, sure enough, it is.
And also, it's one of the 3 games on the Vita in the West.
I mean, after you play Persona 4 Golden, what else is there? But then to discover that the sequel comes out so soon in the West, and I was hooked. I love this franchise. And while I don't think the first game is the best, in fact, wow, it actually may be the weakest of the 3 main games, because there's like a character action spin-off. It's a little goofy. That's probably the worst game. But I mean, of the main 3, for it to be, I guess, comparatively the weakest, and yet it's still such a strong entry point for a franchise. Just great stuff, honestly. And so it was fun to learn a little bit about the origins of the franchise, because we've talked about games 2 and 3, but what about the first game? Well, it starts with series planner and writer Kazutaka Kodaka. And he was coming off of being a planner for Spike's previously popular series, the Dragon Ball Z Budokai games. Particularly, Kodaka was a planner for Budokai Tenkaichi 3 and Dragon Ball Z Raging Blast.
Unfortunate for him.
But Spike wanted their own product, though, instead of just licensing out games like Dragon Ball Z. And so Kodaka wanted to create an action-adventure game. So he conceptualized a darker narrative focusing on the idea of a killing game. At first, the characters were adults, but this was changed to high school students because of their immaturity, and as a result, they could go through more character growth. Also, it would be interesting to see how they would react to a killing game, as opposed to like some adults who, you may have some who are just used to it and are all on board. Teenagers, high school students, you kind of get a wider range of reactions. But the combination of teenagers in a killing game caused some sensitivity at Spike, but it was a shock value that they were excited about. So the gameplay was titled, quote, stylish high-speed reasoning action. Well, the cast was designed under the idea of psychopop. Not the first time we've used those two words to describe Danganronpa on this show. But yes, as you mentioned, the characters are notable in that they are 2D anime sprites on 3D backgrounds. And so they really stand out a whole lot. Then the game was also influenced by the band X Japan's former guitarist Hide by coloring the blood pink. One, as a form of censorship, so you don't have a very bloody game that gets very high Sero or ESRB ratings. And also, it would be pretty stylish to have pink blood, wouldn't you say? And yes, it certainly stands out. The game is also primarily themed off of the idea of hope versus despair, but it's also represented in the contrast between the despair of murders and the hope that you may get from solving cases. Originally, this project was planned to be titled Distrust, but Spike really wanted this psychopop idea to kind of live on, and they thought Distrust would make it seem too dark, and so they rejected that title, and so they come up with Danganronpa, which is a portmanteau of the Japanese words for bullet and refute. As I mentioned, you gather evidence, they take the form of bullets, you refute false claims in trials by shooting bullets at words. It makes sense, but boy, it's a mouthful of Danganronpa.
Yeah, it sure is.
Overall, the inspiration's a clear inspiration from Koshun Takami's 1999 novel Battle Royale, where you have kids murdering each other in an environment to be the last one standing. It's pretty accurate. Also, the films Saw and Cube were also inspirations. Initially, Makoto was written as an unreliable teenager, but Kodaka changed his mind and kind of changed up his writing, especially at the end, upon seeing the performance of actress Megumi Ogata, who is the Japanese voice actor for Makoto. She would also voice a different character entirely in the sequel, which is certainly interesting.
I know the English voices have had a couple of moments where I'm like, I recognize this. Who is the... Oh, it's Cassandra Lee Morris. Oh, I see. Oh, it's Erica Harlacher, who I just played a game where she's one of the main characters recently. And that threw me for a loop as well. Though I keep thinking that one of the characters is voiced by Lanny Minella, my nemesis and also very nice lady. And it's not. And I keep having moments like that where I'm like, this sounds like this person. No, it's a different voice actor I've literally never heard of. Oh, jeez.
It's a really fun cast overall, and I think it only gets better in the sequels. I mean, just wait until, oh god, if you ever play that character action game of Ultra Despair Girls, where you play as Makoto's sister, and it's like, oh, it's Cherami Lee. Excellent. But let's talk about that English localization, because it took so long for an English localization to be made. You had fan translations of the first game pop up online before NIS America handled the project. And so when it was officially accepted, that, we're going to make a localization of Danganronpa, the only request that Spike made to NIS America was keeping Monokuma's name intact. Great thing to suggest because, if you change it to like
Mean Bear.
Yeah. Oh, no, absolutely not. So overall, they made some minor changes to characters' names, but overall kept things really accurate, really faithful, and just accessible to Western gamers overall. So Spike was happy with how that turned out. Danganronpa reviewed fairly well with a Metacritic score of 80 for the Vita version. The PC got an 82. Critics enjoyed the narrative, the aesthetic style, the characters, the class trial gameplay, the soundtrack, and just overall its innovation to the genre. There were some trial mini-games, a couple plot points, there's the dating sim element that was kind of weak, and overall the low difficulty of the game were seen as critiques. Not much sales data available, though it's estimated to have sold about 340,000 copies on the Vita version. Probably close to similar numbers on PC if I had to guess, but approximately a third of that on PS4's Reload. So, pretty niche overall, but certainly enough to start a franchise. As far as the awards that it won, GameFan awarded the game as Game of the Year, which, wow, okay. Also the Best Sony Portable Exclusive Game and Best Adventure Game. Game Informer deemed it Best Vita Exclusive, while RPG Fan awarded it Best Story and Best Graphic Adventure. So you have different outlets that noted it, but didn't really make any big splash on the big game awards in 2014 in particular in the West. In 2017, though, readers of the Japanese magazine Famitsu voted Danganronpa as the 4th best adventure game of all time, behind Steins Gate, 428 Shibuya Scramble, and Phoenix Wright Ace Attorney. As far as its legacy goes, it started a franchise with, 2 sequels. You had that third-person character action spin-off, you have some light novels, and even 2 anime series. And while it inspired games like Paradise Killer rather directly, it also inspired games that you wouldn't have guessed. The creative-director over at Don't Nod noted how Danganronpa inspired Life is Strange in a way. Which I guess that's a tie, all right. Okay. Well, we've talked about the main composer, Masafumi Takada, on the episode of Danganronpa 2 on Original Soundchat episode 20. We talked about the vocalist of the ending song and also the voice actor, Megumi Ogata, and how she has been in a whole bunch of different anime. But let's talk about Satoshi Iwase. And Satoshi Iwase, we'll get to his work in the Critical 5 and the Cutting Room Floor and all that, but it's tough to tell who Satoshi Iwase is when there's a game developer with the same name who did art and modeling on the Monster Rancher and Atelier games, and also a scientific researcher. And look, Satoshi Iwase seems to be a pretty common name. It happens quite a bit, especially if you listen to the most recent Smasterpieces, and Matt makes that observation. It's that happens. So for what I could find on the composer, Satoshi Iwase, he was born on December 13th, 1972. He is a blood type O, and he's played the keyboard since childhood. Hard to tell and get proof for sure, but some sites noted how he was seemingly in a group called Man Decade in the late 80s.
That is an 80s as hell name.
Especially a Japanese one, my goodness. And then he started a record company called Afflict Records. But since his early 20s, he was active as a keyboard player and programmer, and he also started arranging in his late 20s. He seems to be most active in sound production, live show support, some sessions. Not seemingly much of a composer, but working more as a musician, support for certain pop songs. you can follow him on Twitter at Iwapyong, Iwapyong. Did not expect to find him there, but that seems to be him. At least it was tied to his main blog and all that. So Satoshi Iwase composed the ending themes for the first and second Danganronpa games. And these were, of course, also sung by Megumi Ogata. So it makes me wonder if they were singles originally for her as a pop artist that they then pulled into Danganronpa, because he hasn't composed music in any games. And for some of the other works that he's done, I did not recognize anything else. So makes me wonder if it's some random anime here or a pop album in Japan here. So, obviously he's busy. He's done some work, but not really in the space of video game, composition, things like that. It's just, you had to pull a name from the Danganronpa series that haven't covered before, and it was interesting to discover this, let's just say. Also, there's not much historical development research. There are different quotes and reflections on some of these songs, and so let's cover that here in the 5 critical tracks for Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. We have to start with the first song, the main theme. It's Danganronpa.
Danganronpa.
Ah, yes, a main theme that you will certainly hear throughout the franchise. Definitely a leitmotif of the da 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 da. It's a bop, it's a jam, and just an overall great piece that, you get that computerized Danganronpa, and then it just hits you hard. It's just so good. Just sets the tone immediately for the kind of energy you're going to get in this series. And so, yes, the main theme of the franchise, it also plays in an anime-like opening in the game where it's for its title sequence, that kind of takes place a bit into the game. You're seeing all the characters pop up and their names, and it's very, very anime-like, but it kind of just hits you right away with that kind of energy. Masafumi Takada noted how he came up with this song and said, quote, "Kodaka-san asked me for something with some punch. I guess I took the energy from his project pitch and translated it into music. All I remember about writing it is I didn't have any time because I was busy with another project, so I just banged it out in 20 or 30 minutes. Afterwards, as I was cleaning up the arrangement, I had my Max robot voice say, 'Danganronpa,' and I gave myself goosebumps. I can still feel them to this day." I think he also referenced that there was some kind of homage to the Silver Case, which is a Suda51 game. So I think that was probably what he was working on at the time. But yeah, this is the main Danganronpa theme.
And I believe the story of the Mac robot voice also came up during the episode on 2.
Yep.
Because that game's version of this song was on that Critical 5. Banged it out in 20 or 30 minutes. Okay, wow, all right. That's some Nobuo Uematsu wrote the prelude to Final Fantasy in half an hour energy there. Damn.
It sure is. Oh my goodness.
It is a very, very cool song. I think I like the Danganronpa 2 version better from what I remember it sounding like. A bit of a higher quality MIDI, by virtue of it not being, a PSP game.
Yeah, and also, you get more time with it. You get to kind of mull on how to improve it a little bit more. that makes sense, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Though I'm not 100% sure why what was his thought process of, man, I'm stuck in a rut on this song. What if I opened up the text-to-speech and typed in the game's name?
How would a computer pronounce it?
What were you doing at the time? I don't understand. What was your thought process? I want to ask him that one day. We'll see.
Maybe, fingers crossed. Let's move on to number 2 on their Critical 5, and boy, this one pops up all the time in this game. This is Mr. Monokuma's Lesson. Okay, let's talk about Monokuma. This song is generally represented as Monokuma's main theme, especially when he isn't being a threat. He's just the school's headmaster. Also, there are little skits that play in between in-game days where like he's waxing poetic. Look, this is just a weird, quirky song for a bear that the development team describes as, quote, bossy, condescending, smarmy, goofy, quick to anger, quick to forgive, quick to anger again, devious, and totally lovable. Monokuma was one of the best villains in gaming of that year, and just a great villain overall. When talking about this song in particular, Kodaka says, quote, I asked for hijinks, and that's exactly what Takada-san delivered. The playful tone actually makes Monokuma seem more threatening, which is a success in my book. And I feel like this is a quote we've generally used from Takada in the past where he says, quote, psychopop shenanigans and lurking death. Something like, we're all gonna die sooner or later, cha-cha-cha. It's just a great way to represent Monokuma. There's another track where it's more imposing and threatening, and that's another great Monokuma theme. But this is the one that you have to know from this game.
This is going to sound weird, but I think this is my favorite song on the soundtrack so far.
I mean, yeah.
Like in general. I would like to take issue with the totally lovable label that they are placing on this bear.
Oh, give it time, give it time.
He is completely unbearable. Pun not intended, but he deserves it. And like the worst, and that's kind of why he's good.
Yeah.
Like he's the actual worst, and his voice in English is like one of the most grating voices ever, which like kudos to you guys, because I assume that was intentional.
Oh, yeah, it's actually a great casting choice from the Japanese voice. And actually, like, the anime of the first Danganronpa game, like, it's, you know, Funimation, like, they recast some voices. Monokuma's as one of them, and it's like, oh no, it's much worse. Like, this is the definitive English Monokuma voice, for sure.
It's fantastic. Monokuma is unlikable, but in the way that makes you like him. And I'm looking forward to learning more about him, but this song is the one that has like stuck out to me so far in the little that I have played.
It's a peculiar song with its it sticks with you. That's for sure. Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah, so good. So good. Also, like number 3 on the Critical 5. We're getting into some murder investigation. This is Box 15. That percussion kicks in and it's so good. One of the best, if not the best, murder investigation theme in the series, I'll say, even over the course of multiple games. Just a great groove immediately. Simple instruments at first, but then they add more over time. I mean, the trumpets kick in later in the piece. Fantastic. There's also a track called Box 16, which is more of the late game investigation track. I remember in Danganronpa 2, we covered Ekoroshia or Kill Command, which it's crazy guitars, like, you know, really added something to the late game investigation there. But for this game, for Box 16, I mean, I feel like the crazy electric guitar shredding is actually a little too much. I mean, it adds the tension, sure, but I feel like there's something so pure and so right with Box 15 here. It's a great piece. And as you go around talking to people, investigating spots, trying to get those bullet pieces of evidence, it's just a great, great tune to vibe to.
Yeah, I dig this song. I mean, obviously, I've only had one experience with the investigation so far, but yeah, this is a pretty good groove that also sounds a little bit dark. I think it puts that out well. There's a game that it reminds me of. It's not Ace Attorney, because that's the first thing my brain says, but no, this isn't quite Ace Attorney. There are songs on the soundtrack that are, but this isn't one of them. Maybe I'll think of it tonight at 4 o'clock in the morning or something. I don't know. We'll see. It's a good song.
Yeah, no, it's definitely it's not just like totally standard. It puts its own little tweak on things, but it stands out on the soundtrack for sure. Just like number 4 on the Critical 5 here for Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc, we have to cover Discussion Break. So, on other episodes where we've covered Danganronpa games, we've generally talked about, like, discussion, hope versus despair, which is like the end game, big climax of everything is an important piece from that game. This game, though, to start it off, this is the beginning non-stop debate theme in class trials, where it's essentially the way of, like, you know, the person on the stand in an Ace Attorney game giving their testimony. It's like the moderato, if you will, the beginning of the testimony. And it's this frenetic pace? Are you kidding me? Oh my gosh, break. So I think for the one that started it all, it's important to include this one in the first Danganronpa game. Masafumi Takada notes how, quote, "The class trial music is all about creating and establishing momentum. It serves the same purpose as the background music in a racing game. The voice samples ratchet up the excitement, so I try to make the music punchy with clear rhythms that layer well with the voice samples." And boy, does it. You get the room kind of spinning around you, words flying in. You have to shoot those parts of the words that don't make sense with the matching evidence. It's a big, frenetic soundscape, and it's just so cool. I mean, Joe, what did you think of playing your first class trial in Danganronpa?
It really reminded me of mob cross-examinations from Professor Layton Cross Ace Attorney. That's the vibe I got there. I haven't really gotten into the meat of it yet. I think my only complaint is that it felt like there was a new tutorial that it had to explain to me how to do something every like 10 minutes.
And you get a song that's like, do.
Yeah, that was a little bit overwhelming, and I'm worried about what's going to happen when I go back and have to do it all over again. I mean, none of it seemed super complicated, but when you drop a bunch of information on me at once like that, I kind of just lock up. But yeah, no, it was overall really cool though. I did enjoy it.
And so now, with all of that being said, let's wrap up the Critical 5 with a song that we had on the cutting room floor in 2, because I just couldn't wait, and this is my favorite song on the soundtrack. This is New World Order. Joe, I don't think it's going to be too much of a spoiler to say that the character of Kyoko Kirigiri is going to be an important character in the game, especially later in the story. This is kind of her main theme, especially with some late game developments, and boy, she just rules. Kind of a stone cold ice queen in a way who is very logical. And we don't know what her ultimate talent is.
I have guesses.
I mean, I'm sure you do. But yeah, Kyoko is fantastic, and this song is just awesome. It's like, I feel like the feeling of it is just like things just got turned up a notch, but everything's going to be okay because Kyoko has this handled. It's a very Ace Attorney-like theme. I feel like I noted that when we had it kind of appear on the cutting room floor. It was a RE, New World Order, kind of calling back this theme in the second game. But I mean, this is where it made its mark. This is where it has the most presence, and boy, it still hits.
I think it is a very close second behind the Monokuma music for me so far. I do, now that you mention it, remember this coming up during the Danganronpa 2 episode. But again, that was 2 years ago. Oh, geez.
Yeah,
so,
wow.
It took that to remind me. All right, well.
Well, that said, now that you have played a bit of a Danganronpa game, you have a couple tracks on the cutting room floor, so you have two. Hit me with them.
So, I don't have all the context for these songs. I've heard these songs, obviously, because they're early game, well, not early game, but like full game songs, I'm going to assume. The first one is Beautiful Dead. So this song is the most common song to play during the day while you're walking around before it's nighttime and the water is turned off in the cafeteria. I have to hear it every night, every single night. But this song doesn't play during that time. It plays during the day, and it's honestly pretty all right. I like this song a lot. And this song also plays on the title screen, which is why I picked up on it.
Oh, that's really interesting because it didn't on the Vita version.
Interesting.
Okay, all right.
Changes between the Vita and PC. I really like this song. You found a quote from Takata himself. It says, quote, "For the exploration themes, I tried combining a variety of tones and phrases to convey to the player that big things are afoot. To me, they perfectly express the game world itself. So just listening to them makes me feel like I've got the controller in my hands." And yeah, this is a pretty notable song. You hear it quite a bit.
Yeah, you're going to hear it a lot. Absolutely. It's a big part of the game experience. And yeah, they just kind of create these big, lush soundscapes here. Takata does a great job of, yeah, things are not tense. You're walking about having a stroll, like things are progressing in the story, but the music will eventually change when the big things happen. For now, everything's okay in a killing game.
For my second song on the cutting room floor, I think it's actually like tied with New World Order for second favorite song currently. That is Distrust. This song plays when the trial takes a turn, usually because Kyoko presented something because she's the best. And also, I believe this song sort of plays sometimes when it's like, oh man, something really bad is happening. Near the beginning of the game, at least, I heard this quite a bit.
Yeah, like people aren't trusting each other outside of the trial. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, this song is super cool, especially like the intro you hear in the clip is rad. I really, really dig that intro. Also, the original game's title was Distrust, which makes the title of this song very interesting. I wonder if that's intentional. I don't know.
It may be a cool callback, that's for sure. But yeah, I mean, cool stuff with the synths here and like the warbling of pitch going on, and it's great stuff. I mean, things are starting to take the twist here. Like, it's not exactly what you expected when this music is playing, and that's for sure. For me, I also have a couple, but it's kind of the more wrapping things up kind of thing. Let's put it this way: the first track on the cutting room floor for me is Climax Reasoning. In case you didn't know, at the end of the class trials, in the 6 chapters in this game, when Makoto kind of has to gather his thoughts and say, okay, here's how everything happened, you get to put together a manga of the murder. And you get these little panels that, from right to left, you have to kind of place in order and kind of figure that out. And this is the music that plays when you are planning all of that out and putting those pieces in place. It's a great theme, and it's a really cathartic way before, the Danganronpa theme, an instrumental kind of version, a little more subdued version, comes in when Makoto is recapping the events of the murder as we've learned them. So just a great piece here. Like, yeah, you're on that last home stretch here. Great piece.
I don't know how I feel about the manga so far, because I've only done it once. We'll have to see. It's very odd and unique, I'll give it that. Hey, And this song's pretty good as well. So I guess we'll see if it continues from there.
Let's just say there are worse mini games to do during the trial. And then we finally bring in the work of Satoshi Iwase. The other track for me on the cutting room floor is Saisei Rebuild. So yes, composed by Satoshi Iwase with vocals by Megumi Ogata. This is the ending credits theme. And it's a kind of poppy J-rock song. It's got that energy, and oh man, Ogata's just such a great singer. Great vocal talent, but not only with acting and performing, but singing as well. Oh my goodness. When I heard this for the first time, and still when I hear it, I get the vibe that it's like almost an opening to the Yu-Gi-Oh anime, like the Japanese Duel Monsters version. And that's kind of amusing in a way when you think of how Megumi Ogata is the voice of Yugimoto, and technically Yamayugi as well. But really interesting that my brain goes that way and thinks that. But I mean, yeah. So here's Iwase's work, and it's this poppy, fun song. Does it match perfectly with Danganronpa and its ending? I don't know, not necessarily, but it's a fun piece, and it's at the end of everything, you get this kind of energy. It's neat.
Well, this is one of those where we're just going to have to see.
Mm-hmm.
Now, won't we?
I mean, I hope so. I hope you get to continue it.
I also hope so.
So what will I never forget about Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc? I think the characters, first and foremost, some great characters. I mentioned Kyoko Kirigiri. She's the best.
Some great characters, and the fan fiction guy. he's there too, I guess.
Yeah, you're right. Yamada sure is there. Huh. Yup. He sure is. But I mean, overall, just, you remember so many of those characters. I feel like also the twists, while they may be predicted as you're playing them, some of them just come out of nowhere, at least. And for as much experience as I had playing Ace Attorney games, I feel like some of those still blindsided me and were just a delight, and they stick with you for sure. But overall, just building a franchise that I loved and was able to continue so soon after playing the first game. And through it all, Masafumi Takada's music to accompany it all. So it's, just great memories overall with a franchise that I love.
I'm looking forward to getting back to it. I'll get through it, god damn it. It's been installed on this PC for 2 years.
I'm going to keep you to it. You got your 2021 goals. We've got a segment of the show where I can be like, hey, how's Danganronpa going?
every week where the answer's not, I made it at least one more chapter in, is a week that next time we're physically in the same location, you get to punch me in the face.
Yes, excellent. Or should I say, or oop, 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 oop in the Japanese version. Anyway, when we're talking about Danganronpa and a game that directly was inspired by it in Paradise Killer, sometimes we have only the loosest connections between games, but it's pretty spot on this week, and that will do it for us this week on Original Soundchat. You can find me on Twitter at PeteSpeakEasy. Joe is over at StringPixel. That's a new account for him, so if you followed him on his other account, you got to follow this one now, at StringPixel. The video version of the show is on the Rhymes with Asia YouTube channel, but it's that MP3 podcast version that you want, hosted by Anonymous Dinosaur at anondino.squarespace.com. That's where Joe's other podcast, Smash Your Pieces, is hosted, and you can find Smash Your Pieces and Original Soundchat wherever you get your podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, even on Spotify, where we have a feed of episodes, but also a big Spotify playlist where if we cover a video game song on this show and it's on Spotify, it's getting added to that monster playlist. Joe, what's being added this week?
Both of these are on Spotify, baby.
Yeah, that is so good to hear. We love when that happens.
I keep forgetting that Danganronpa, the whole series, appears to be on Spotify, which is neat.
But also good on Paradise Killer to be right there alongside it. And, more than just the one track that we already had added from the Best of 2020 honorable mentions. So that'll be good for sure. When you're done listening there, you can find us on social media at Soundchat OST for some feedback, how we're doing with these episodes, and also suggestions for games that we should cover in the future, because that's our big goal for 2021. Thanks again to helping, kind of spread the word and get it out there for the Matanui Online game episode. That was our second highest viewed video on YouTube as far as Original Soundchat episodes go. So thank you for showing the love on that one.
And speaking of showing the love, hey, if you have the ability on any of the podcast services you find us on to throw us a rating and a review, and maybe even subscribing, even if you don't necessarily use that service for podcasts, something like Spotify where you can subscribe for free, even if it's not what you use, that would really help. That helps with SEO. Please, please.
Absolutely. It gets the word out there, and we'd really appreciate that. In the future, we'll get a merch site up and running, get some bonus tracks your way. But until then, Joe, who are we talking about next week?
Well, hopefully I'll be talking about Andrew Prallo.
I plan to be talking about Michael Bross. Oh my goodness, how is this video game year just zooming by? I can't believe it.
It's already June.
Oh no. Well, to play us out, I'd like to cover a fan remix, whether it's on OC Remix, YouTube, wherever. Found the YouTuber Vetrum. We may have covered him in the past, but in particular, found this cover that he did of Box 15. It's a jam. It slaps. I really enjoy it. Thank you so much for listening this week on Original Soundchat. We'll see you next time. Take care.